Hey there, cheese historians! I'm Julia, and this is Cheese History, a channel where I normally talk about the origins, history, and impact of cheese. But today, I'm going to do something a little different. Today, I'm going to be trying to recreate one of those ancient types of cheese. I recently came across a simple cheese, or you could call it a cheesecake type recipe, from the time of the Roman Empire, recorded by Greek writer Athenaeus of Naucratis. I wanted to see if I could recreate this because the recipe starts with milk, which has to be coagulated, so it's basically making cheese. The recipe itself is pretty straightforward, so I thought when I came across it, it would be a good opportunity to see if I could figure out how to make this work while staying as close to the original instructions as I could. And this video is basically going to be how that went, with a little bit of history about the recipe itself. The writer of this recipe, Athenaeus of Naucratis, lived during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, during the reigns of Marcus Aurelius and his son Commodus of gladiator fame. Athenaeus wrote the Deipnosophistae, or Deipnosophists, which roughly translates as the dinner experts. The book quotes many other earlier works on cooking that have not survived the centuries, so it's kind of an important source for cooking prior to the 2nd century AD. The recipe that I'm going to have a go at recreating is from one of these other books, which was written by a guy called Chrysippus of Tyana. The book itself is called Artokopikos, or The Art of Bread Making. Not much is known about either Chrysippus or his recipe book because his recipe book has not survived, and all we have is what Athenaeus has recorded. So let's have a look at the recipe I'm going to try to recreate. So the recipe says this: and ubertidides are made in this manner. After putting honey into milk, squeeze or press down and put into a vessel and let coagulate. Then, if you have near you small sieves, put the contents of the vessel into them and let the whey run out. And when you think it is coagulated, take up the vessel, turn quickly into a silver dish, and the appearance will be upwards. But if you have no sieves, scrape with a flabellum, or ceremonial fan, with which the fire is fanned, for it produces the same advantage. As you can see, the instructions are fairly simple. Add honey to milk, let coagulate, then drain off the whey and put into a fancy dish. Now you can find other recreations of this recipe elsewhere on YouTube as well, particularly one by Sola of Ancient Recipes with Sola. I will put a link to that video below so you can see how she did it if you're interested. We have quite different takes on how to interpret this recipe, so it would probably be quite interesting to compare them side by side, particularly to see how they came out. My plan to recreate this is to heat 2 litres of milk to 32 degrees centigrade, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, add some mesophilic starter culture to make up for the fact that the milk I'm using is pasteurized. Then I'm going to add about a cup of honey, mix it together, and see if it does coagulate. So let's see how it goes. I started off by sterilizing my equipment so everything was nice and clean in preparation for making the cheese. The honey was also up to room temperature so it was nice and smooth. The milk I'm using is pasteurized but unhomogenized full cream milk. First step was obviously to put the milk in the pot. Then I had to heat the milk to 32 degrees Celsius, or I think it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This took about 20 minutes or so. I then added the mesophilic starter culture and stirred it into the milk, making sure it was well incorporated. Once that was done, I added in the honey. Then I stirred the honey through the milk. It took quite a while for the honey to dissolve properly, and in the end I also had to reheat the milk back to 32 degrees centigrade just to make sure all the honey got mixed in. Once everything was well mixed, I left the pot with the milk sitting on the bench to see how long it would take for it to coagulate. 28 hours later, it had finally coagulated. Then it was time to spoon it into a butter muslin lined colander so that I could drain off the whey. In the end, it was easier just to pour it into the colander, but it did end up splattering over my kitchen a bit and made a bit of a mess. Then it had to sit and drain so I could drain off the whey. I let it sit for about 6 hours, by which time it was quite late at night, so I decided to see how much whey I could squeeze out of it, just to make it a little bit drier so that it could sit in the fridge overnight so I could check it out the next morning. I spooned some of it into a ricotta mold so that it could drain a bit more and it would also get a little bit of a pattern on it, so I would be following Athenaeus' recipe. And this was the final result. So this is basically what I've ended up with the following day. I've ended up with this amount of cheese in a ricotta mold, and I'm going to have to try and turn it out onto this plate without making a huge mess. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes. So first I'm going to have to ditch this outer mold. Let's take that off. Put that down there. Right. So the easiest way to do this is going to be to have the plate upside down. So I'm going to flip it. Oh, look at that! It even actually worked. Ha! It actually turned out with a bit of a pattern. Probably not the one that was actually mentioned in the original recipe, but something kind of similar to it at least. So I got myself a spoon. I'm going to taste this to see what it's like, to see if it's actually edible, to see if it actually makes a decent cheese. I guess one of my concerns about it is because it's been coagulated with culture, it might be quite sour because the acidity level's been raised in order for the solids to coagulate out of the milk. I'm kind of hoping that the honey counteracts that somehow, but I guess the only way to find out is to actually try it. In terms of smell, throughout the whole making process, it's kind of smelled a lot like the honey. The type of honey I've used has quite a strong flavour to it, so I'm kind of hoping that the taste of the honey is going to come through reasonably strongly. But I guess there's only one way to find out. So here goes. So texture-wise, it's kind of quite crumbly. Kind of possibly like with the texture of, say, cream cheese, which is kind of interesting. It smells quite sweet, sort of milky. Let's find out what it tastes like. It tastes really like the honey. It's very smooth. Yeah, it's kind of the first flavour that hits you is the flavour of the honey, and then it gets quite smooth and creamy sort of flavour. Not strongly creamy, but yeah, just yeah, that honey comes through really strongly, and then you get a bit more of the milk flavour. It's not really sour at all, which is kind of interesting, because I expected it to have gone at least sort of sour from the amount of time it spent just sitting on the bench as it coagulated. So that's kind of really interesting. I was kind of slightly concerned it was going to be inedible to some degree, so it's actually quite pleasantly surprising that it's edible. It's different to kind of most other things I've tried. It's different from how I expected it to be, and I wonder how different it would have been if I'd used honey that has a less strong flavour. Then you might have got more of the flavour of the cheese, the milk, the cream coming through. Texture-wise, it kind of starts off quite grainy because it's still quite clumpy, but it sort of melts and smooths out in your mouth a little bit, which is interesting. So yeah, that's interesting. I've actually ended up making a cheese that's both sort of follows the original recipe and is kind of edible. So this is my attempt at recreating Hypotirides, or what I'm calling honey cheese, sticking as closely as I can to the recipe recorded by Athenaeus. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. It's a bit different from what I normally do, in that I normally just spend all my time talking about cheese history, so I would be really interested in knowing what your thoughts are on this. Also, let me know in the comments what you think of this interesting looking and sounding cheese. Do you think there's anything I could have done differently in making it that might have affected how it turned out? It'd be really interesting to know your thoughts. If you want to see some of the more modern cheeses that I make, do follow me over on Instagram. And that's all for this time on Cheese History.